Cool. So welcome everybody. This is the first ever Gap Year Leader Summit. So we're really happy to have everybody here. As I mentioned, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Field Leader Committee. We are part of the Gap Year Association. So we're the ones who sort of created and are hosting this summit over the next couple of days. We'll go through a really quick orientation for everybody. First off, hooray, this is happening. We're here. So again, this is the first event of its kind that I know of, I think that we know of. This is done really out of love, out of passion, and out of everybody on the committee volunteering their time. So a big thank you to everyone for making it happen. This is our first time. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be bumps in the road. So just bear with us, as I'm sure you will. Second, this is a sort of an unveiling of us for a committee. We're brand new to the Gap Year Association over the past year, and our mission is really to elevate the voices of leaders, give them a platform to directly engage within the industry, and then to make their lives better in whatever way that manifests, in whatever way we can. So we sort of feel like we are coaches, mentors, a community that is in your corner to be able to support you along that journey. And then last, this summit is really for you. It's for leaders. It's created to make your lives better, to elevate your voices. The goals of this summit really are to connect with each other, to support each other, and then to learn from each other. We'll be providing a variety of information throughout this, but we really want and need your feedback to help direct the future of our work as a committee. So it's really sort of help us to help you. So feedback, dialogue, communication are all really important for us to be able to do that. We'll have a couple of surveys at the end of the summit, but besides that, if you like what's going on, let us know. If you think we can do something better, let us know. If you have ideas about ways in which we can support you, please let us know. And then again, I just want to take a second to give a big thank you to everybody. We sort of have gone through a bit of the introductions, but in terms of who is there in our committee, we have Kempie Blythe, Chris Berry, Beth Iannelli, Summer Urval, and Evan Johnson. We've literally sort of spanned the globe with this committee. So we've got members on both sides of the US, we've got members in India, in New Zealand, and Vietnam. So covering all time zones. And it has been a labor of love. There's been a lot of late nights and early mornings, including today, to pull this off. And then we also have all the people in the Gap Year Association, Elizabeth, Vanessa, Diana, and Carrie, who've been really supportive to be able to do this as well. So I wanted really, for a quick second right here, to just, if everybody could unmute for a second and just give a couple of whoops, a couple of woo, a couple of whatever you want to give to support everybody here, that would be really great.
Yay!
Oops.
Awesome, thanks everybody. So I'm going to pass it over to Carrie, who will talk a little bit about the Gap Year Association.
Awesome. I'm going to switch slides. Okay, can we?
Yep.
Do that here. Let's see. I don't think I'm in the right spot quite yet. All right. Well, for folks I haven't met yet, I just want to thank you on behalf of the Gap Year Association. I myself am actually relatively new to the organization. I just joined the Gap Year Association in January as its second ever executive director. So for those of you who've been around for a bit, Ethan Knight, the famous Ethan Knight. So I've got some really big shoes to fill. Ethan is the founder of the Gap Year Association, which was just established in 2012. And so as an association, we are still a relatively young nonprofit. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be joining you all in helping to lead us into our next decade. So being established in 2012, it means right now we're celebrating our 10th anniversary as an association with a mission of maximizing the potential of young adults through accessible and meaningful gap year opportunities. So I know a lot of you have been part of the community for a while, so this is really just more of a welcome to those of you who are participating in the Gap Year Association for the first time. We've got all these on this slide. I just wanted to present here a few of our different badges just as a way of introducing sort of the broader scope of the Gap Year Association. As a 501c3 nonprofit association, we really have a variety of different stakeholders. So everyone from official gap year colleges who essentially join at a high membership level to recognize and develop positive admissions policies around welcoming students who have come fresh out the gap year into their university, to folks like, different program providers who are on the call today. Fiona, you're like right there on my screen with Pacific Discovery as a, program provider. So these are the entities that are out there delivering structured programs to students. And then we've got folks like Marion who are gap year consultants, and then a variety of just general members. So these are field leaders and parents and students themselves. And so it really makes for a diverse community of gap year members. And with that, there we go. In order to sort of achieve this mission and meet the needs and interests of all the variety of folks who join the Gap Year Association, we really have 4 primary pillars of focus. And that first one being equity and access, in which we want to really ensure that honestly any student who wants to pursue a gap year has that opportunity, regardless of where they're located, whether they're a first generation student, whatever their socioeconomic status is, whatever it may be. And so we've got, I know, some representation from our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee that's really trying to look at efforts to make gap years accessible for the broader community. We also have a committee that focuses just on research to really break down some of those barriers and those myths that exist by presenting true research that shows the benefits and the outcomes of gap years. So that committee is producing an annual State of the Field survey as well as a national alumni survey. And then, primarily what a lot of folks know us for is just our free resources and advocacy. So if you've been to our website, you know that you can search programs, you can find consultants, you can download planning guides. We really are the only nonprofit leading the national movement for coordinating the gap year movement. So the website's a great place to be. And then finally, we do hold the Standards Development Organization for Gap Year Education in the United States through the U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. So in this role, we have a really robust accreditation process for both gap year providers and consultants that they go through this process and have a separate seal as an accredited program provider or accredited consultant. And that means they've really met the highest standards that exist within the gap year industry. And so it's really the, in a nutshell, a really quick overview of who we are and what we do at the Gap Year Association. And I just mentioned it is, in order to do this work, we're absolutely dependent upon our committees. And so it's the Field Leaders Committee, Kai and Kempie and Evan and others who are here today who've really made this possible. And we've got a research committee, an outreach committee, a membership committee, 10 different committees carrying out the work of the Gap Year Association. So if this is one of your first experiences, know there's a lot of different ways that you can contribute to the community. And I just welcome you here. And the last thing I'll say, I know Kai told me, he said just a few seconds, so I may have been taking more time, but I just want to get this across as well, as in terms of coming in as the new executive director. My first day in experiencing anything related to GYA was actually at the conference. So I got to join the conference back in November, and I popped around to different committees that were meeting, and I landed into the Field Leaders Committee, and I was just so thrilled. I think that was maybe one of your first meetings. Was that right, Kai? Like first or second?
Yeah, I think it was, maybe your second meeting. Yeah.
And for me, I felt like I found my people within the Gap Year Association, because prior to joining GYA, I ran a national nonprofit here in Missoula called the Wild Rockies Field Institute that provided outdoor experiential ed opportunities for college students all over the country. They got college credit from the University of Montana, engaging in rigorous academics while in backcountry settings. And so I'm coming into GYA really fully understanding what you all do as field leaders, because I supervised and managed and supported 20 field leaders at that organization. And I just want you all to know that I know that in this industry, none of our programming would be possible without the field leaders. And so I recognize how much you carry on your shoulders, from, you know, everything from group dynamics to the risk management piece to the personal impact that it has in this career choice that you've you know, or this path that you are on, how demanding it is, and how absolutely rewarding it is. So just know that it's my intention at GYA to always ensure that the field leaders have a voice, a space, in this opportunity to network. And I'm just really grateful for the committee that's bringing you all together. And just know that you've got a home at GYA, and we'll continue to do whatever we can to best support you. Back to you, Kai.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Okay. Okay, just a couple more points here before we get into it. In terms of ways in which we can really connect for this summit. So first is just to engage with the sessions, you know, engage with each other, make connections with each other, bring in your own experience into this. You know, the more you show up, the more you're going to get out of this. Again, please provide us your feedback as we're going on here. This will really help us to guide the future of our committee. We are recording the sessions, so they will be available somewhere after the fact. We'll figure that out and share it out with everybody. And then also please share. As you can see, we need to get the word out here. This is a start for us. This is, you know, the first ever of these. This is the first year for us. If this is helpful, please share this with your friends, because we're trying to, in essence, build a community. We're trying to sort of build a movement from this. So we need to be able to share this message and get more folks involved. Also, a couple of things. So, you know, we had a plan of sort of like 3 hours, both of these evenings. The sessions that we're doing aren't fully, you know, we don't have a strict schedule here. So we'll just sort of see exactly how we go and flow with that. It's likely that we won't take up the full 3 hours, both evenings. And if you do have any questions about that, you can let us know. Also, just a quick heads up for me, I'm currently in India. Hopefully my internet connection remains strong. It's, you know, 5 a.m. right now, so hopefully not many people are using it. But if it starts to get choppy, let me know, and there's a couple of things that I can do to try to adjust that. Okay, one second. I'm gonna swap into this other presentation and get us kicked off here. Okay, sweet. So kicking things off, I'm going to be setting the context for a lot of what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the summit. I'm talking about the state of the leader field as we see it. And as you can see from subtitle, we'll be talking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Hopefully that will become a bit clearer in a couple of minutes. Before I dig into everything, I'm going to get into my own background and context. You can see where I'm coming from, and then also talk about a little bit of basic terminology to make sure that we're all on the same page. So my background, I've been in the industry for about 15 years, close to 15 years. I started out as a leader. I worked for about 5 years with a variety of different companies. I worked with high school students and gap year students, college students, as well as adult travelers. And I worked on programs everywhere from 1 week to about 3 months. So I've had a relatively broad leading experience there. The majority of my time was with a gap year company called Global Learning Cross Borders. And so that was sort of my bread and butter for those 5 years. After that, I started directing, and I joined with Rustic Pathways as your Indian Nepal country director, again, for about 5 years. And then joined another, travel company after that. COVID hit, brief delay, and then now I've been working with Ingenuity Year. Ingenuity Year is it's a new gap year program. It is in collaboration with a school in Connecticut, and it's focused on students with learning differences. And so that's a little bit of my background, and I'm coming back to Act Normal here. This is something that I founded. So it was a company that I founded, organization that I founded about 4 years ago. And in essence, it's doing a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do today. So it's a company founded specifically for leaders within, GAP, high school, study abroad, outdoor ed, the whole spectrum. An attempt to really make life better for leaders within the industry for field staff. And I did that for about 2 years. And over the course of that, it was basically just doing a lot of research, talking to leaders, talking to companies, try to understand the challenges that people are going through, and then understand ways in which we can create solutions that will address those challenges. So what we're talking about today comes from really a distillation of all of these different things. So it comes from my own experiences as a leader, observations as a director, engaging with leaders, and then over 100 interviews with leaders and companies through Act Normal. So from that, we're really trying to take the pith essence of what it means to be a leader and what it's like to be a leader within the industry. So a couple of points on terminology. Across our industry, we use a lot of different words to mean the exact same thing. We call them overseas educators or international educators or program leaders or guides. But in essence, they're the same position. I use leader as my standard vocabulary because I think that speaks most directly to what the position does. And when I'm talking about a leader, I'm talking about someone who is on the ground, on a program, facilitating some type of experience for others and generally within a group setting. So that's what we're talking about today. And now introducing the leader industry. This is something that's not necessarily well defined or well understood. And so I want to talk about this so we have context for this. So we operate at the intersection of two larger industries, travel and education. And more specifically, we operate at the intersection of travel and international and experiential education. So this little space right here, this area is the leader industry. And of that, gap year is a specific segment within this larger industry. And so we'll talk about this more tomorrow, what the industry looks like, developing careers in the industry. But I just wanted to introduce this so we have this as an idea of our context. So over the course of the summit, we're talking about leaders within the context of gap year, rather specifically, but there's a lot of ramifications and just shared experiences across the whole field, across that whole industry there. Cool. So those are the 2 points of terminology. Next is, why are we here? Why does this matter? Why should we be talking about this? Time is precious, resources are precious. So why should we be spending that time and energy here? And I have 3 answers to that. First, leaders are the product delivery mechanism of our industry. They are the ones that actually connect and facilitate our programs. They facilitate the experience for students. They facilitate learning. Without them, the industry doesn't exist, right? If you boil down the Gap Year Association into its most essential components, it's basically this. We have Kempie doing as our program leader, handing over, delivering the programs to a student on the ground. If you take one of these components out of that, we no longer have an industry. It doesn't exist. So they are super essential. They are the backbone of the industry. Point 2 is that good leaders, so it's not every single leader, but good leaders are absolutely incredible human beings. They are some of the best people that you'll ever meet. You want to spend a lot of time with them. They're people that add value wherever they go, and they're people with incredible skill sets. So this is a quick look at some of those skill sets. And again, we'll get into this more deeply, I think, later today. But the point for right now is just like, wow, that's a lot of skills. This is a lot of things that people are bringing to the table, right? Entire careers are spent in 1 or 2 of these bubbles. Leaders are asked to bring this entire package with them and utilize all of these skill sets. And to do so, they do this with skill and grace and humor in the midst of wildly dynamic environments with teenagers. So it's pretty incredible what they do. And with teenagers, along with teenagers come parents as well, right? So it's sort of a package deal, which adds, of course, other elements into that. And one last point here, above and beyond all these different skill sets, one of the things that we're really asking leaders to bring is their whole being, their self, their soul. So this is not just a job. It's more than that. And we're not hiring just employees, we're hiring really entire human beings when we hire for these programs. And so that's point 2. Good leaders are really incredible, amazing human beings with really amazing skill sets. And the last point here is that they're suffering. There's a lot of challenges that leaders go through over the course of their careers, over the course of their lives, and we're not adequately addressing those as an industry. As an industry, we're failing our leaders. And it's because of this, it's because that these challenges exist, it's because leaders are suffering that now the Field Leader Committee exists. It's because of that we're hosting this summit. It's to understand this, to talk about this, and to really be able to start addressing this, and again, elevating this idea within the industry. So that's a lot of what I'll be talking about today is this struggle and what's going on here, and really digging into that. And so again, to understand that a little bit more deeply, this idea of this struggle, I need to introduce one more concept. So generally, when we talk about leaders, we talk about them in relation to programs. We talk about them as employees. So we hire them for programs, we're training them for programs, we're supporting them while they're delivering the programs, and then we're debriefing them at the end of the programs. And then after that, it's sort of up in the air. Leaders enter into this post-program phase, and this is really where a lot of the challenges, a lot of the struggles start. So I'm not going to talk basically at all about the on-program phase, and as a generalization, our industry does a fairly good job with that part of leader life. We do a pretty good job of hiring and training and supporting on programs as a generalization. Post-program phase, it's a much bigger issue, and we're not doing a very good job in that aspect of leader life. And this also is starting to broaden that conversation and talking about leaders, not just as employees, but as humans. And so the most basic essence of what I'm talking about today is this, that we are giving leaders drugs, and then we're doing nothing when we take those drugs away and leaders go into withdrawal. So drugs is on program, withdrawal is post program. And so if you take nothing else away from this, just take this, that every time a leader goes out into the field, they're getting supplied with some incredible drugs. And to truly support them really comes down to how well we help manage their withdrawal and coming off of that. And we can do that on an individual level, a company level, and an industry level as well. And so again, this is sort of setting the context, and we're going to dig into both of these a bit more. So starting with the drugs, these are the joys, the perks, the amazing opportunities of being a gap year leader. And they're really good. They're really great. And I break this down into these 3 different categories: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So sex is you could say, the social media side of leader life. This is what you see on an Instagram feed. It's one-dimensional, but it is really a lot of fun. So, this would include the opportunity to travel, to work in the outdoors, to work in different countries, to work in dynamic and changing environments. It is the opportunity to do really fun activities like skydiving, whitewater rafting, hiking, meditation, etc. It's the opportunity to get paid to do all of this. So it's this sort of really inherently sexy nature of these jobs and these positions. So these are sort of an outer level of joys. They're more obvious, they're easier to see. It's part of how we advertise for these positions because it's really easily advertised, really easily put out there. So that's sex. Drugs we're starting to come in and go deeper here. So the drugs is, as I mentioned previously, thinking about the skill bubbles, right? One of the key things that you're doing as a leader is bringing yourself and your whole being into this. So you're not just doing a job, you're not just completing a task or producing a product, you're really offering your whole self, and you're utilizing that to be able to engender transformation within others. So you're asked to bring your whole being, your whole self, and utilize this whole range of skills to be able to really help others learn, grow, and transform. And not just others, but yourself as well, right? Through that process, you really go through growth, you go through transformation within that. And this is some of the most powerful and intimate things that we can do as humans, is to truly be offering our whole being to another group and helping facilitate the group do that. So this is the drugs, and this is really, really good stuff. And as I mentioned, right, this is sort of moving inwards. And so these are less obvious. These joys, these drugs, they're a little bit harder to see, but they are incredibly potent. They're incredibly intoxicating. It's again, sort of like peak echelon of what you can do almost as a human. And then rock and roll is sort of everything else. It's everything else that is very normal for a leader within their life, but that which is not normal at all for the rest of society. So again, for example, it is speaking Swahili fluently. It is having connections and friends all over the world. It is needing to ask for the big passport book when you get a passport renewed, because you actually need to utilize all of those pages. It is traveling with $9,999 of program money in your suitcase, because that's the maximum amount you can take into a country before you have to declare it. It's carrying 5 different SIM cards with you at all times, because you know when you get to a new country, you're going to have to swap it out. So it's all these things that are really just another day in the office for leaders that is completely abnormal, completely strange to quote unquote normal life. And so it's just this huge disconnect there. And so this is the drugs, this is the joys. We have these different components that, you know, really lend themselves into that. And so really quickly, a couple of takeaways here. First, this is really true. These things do exist. We're not making this stuff up. They are really incredible things. There are a lot of reasons that people do these jobs. They're incredible jobs. All this stuff can also be very incredibly addicting, as with drugs, as with all these different other things. It is something that can really fill you up, not just be addicting, but really be incredibly soul nourishing. So you leave programs feeling fulfilled, accomplished, and really alive after that. And as with everything else, if you take them away, it can lead to withdrawal. And not just can, but very, very, very often does lead to withdrawal. And so we'll talk about that. What does that look like? So again, you know, this is basically the post-program phase. We're injected with drugs on programs, we go into the post-program, and those drugs no longer exist. And so we're going into more of this withdrawal thing. And this feeling of withdrawal, this phase of withdrawal, can start almost immediately after leaving programs, and it continue for weeks and months and years into the future. Leaders can face a lot of different challenges within this phase, but I've found sort of that the biggest challenges can be broken down into 3 different categories, which I call the big 3. So these are knowledge, community, and stability. And I think these 3 categories probably account for about 90% of the pain that is experienced by leaders in this post-program phase. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about and digging into for the rest of the presentation. So first off, knowledge. Leaders suffer both from a lack of knowledge and then also a lot of challenges to obtain that knowledge. The knowledge that is missing is generally very basic, but it's also quite foundational, and without it, it's hard to move forward or to build anything. And so a quick look at this is, you know, first, what is our industry? Where are we working? Where are we operating? What does this actually look like? You know, as I mentioned previously, we have this gap year segment of the industry, but then there's a much broader industry, leader industry that you could tap into that people basically have no knowledge of. It's hard to make the connections into all these different areas. Second, what opportunities exist? So what jobs are out there? How do I find jobs? How do I develop a career out of this? Can I sustain myself? Is it personally sustainable? Is it financially sustainable? If you have ever tried to look for these type of positions, whether it's a field-based position or a position with a company, if you ever try to look for those on one of the standard job boards or LinkedIn or anything like that, it is incredibly confusing. It is incredibly challenging to know what to type, how to get to the jobs that you need to. As I mentioned again previously with the terminology, there's a whole bunch of different words we throw around that in essence mean the same thing, but you can't necessarily search for all of those. I'm hiring currently for Ingenuity Year, and I don't know where to put my job. It doesn't fall into any of the sort of standard categories that a lot of these job boards give you. So there's just a lot of confusion that is out there. And then last, just really understanding the skills that you bring to the table. Again, as we saw that slide, there's a lot of skills that we utilize and the incredible value that you bring as a leader as well. In a world that is filled with tons of terrible managers and tons of terrible communication, those are two things that leaders really excel at. And so it's really sad that we're not able to have the understanding of the value that we bring and the understanding of being able to really take those skills and apply those into different contexts. And so really understanding that and then also being able to communicate those skills to others. If you don't know it, nobody else really knows it either, right? A lot of times you talk to people about what they're doing and either there's a completely blank face on their look or a completely blank look on their face, or people keep calling you a camp counselor or something like that, really. So it's really hard there's no real shared background or understanding of what those skills are. So again, basic stuff, but really stuff that's really important to be able to understand. And so part of the reason this is that there are a lot of challenges to obtaining this knowledge. First, there's no one place that actually houses this knowledge. There's no Wikipedia, there's no one job board, there's no one educational institution that actually speaks leader, that actually has all this stuff that is there for it. So all this knowledge has to be really cobbled together from a variety of different sources, and that takes a lot of time and energy. Second is that the knowledge that is out there is very siloed. And this is siloed by individuals, by companies, and then different segments of the industry. So not only is there not one place to find it, but there's a whole bunch of different places that you have to go to find it. And you need to sort of like be able to break into some of those silos to be able to get a lot of that information. The gap year industry, in a word, is relational. That is what we're doing in all aspects of our industry. We're developing relationships with communities and with partners and with leaders, right? So with students, it's so incredibly relational. And so is knowledge. Knowledge is largely derived word of mouth within the industry. And so if you do have a really good network with good contacts, with good community, then you're likely to have more knowledge. But without that, it can be really incredibly hard to break into it and also to find it. So it can be fairly bleak without that. And lastly here is instability, which is one of the big three I'll get into in a second. But as I mentioned with these first couple, right, the knowledge is out there, but it's not easy. It's not easy to obtain it. So you have to spend a lot of time and energy to get it. With instability, you don't have that. You don't have the time, you don't have the energy to be able to get this knowledge. And so it just sort of perpetuates. And so the outcome from this, of lacking all this knowledge, is confusion about the industry, confusion about jobs, confusion about opportunities and careers, anxiety because you don't know what you're doing, low self-worth because you don't understand the incredible value that you bring, and then this professional black hole that can be really hard to get out of, and you sort of just can find yourself swirling around in for quite a while. So that's knowledge. With community, I'm breaking this down into three different categories. First, we have the existence or non-existence of community. Leaders are really incredible creators and facilitators of community. That's what we're doing. We do it all the time on programs. We're really skilled at being able to do that, but you're constantly leaving all the communities that you're creating. They're almost always temporary. You know, you're on a program, you create the community of that program, the program ends, you go back home. You go back home, you try to rekindle your community that you've just been out of for 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is, and then you leave that to go back onto another program. So you're always constantly creating and leaving communities. Sometimes, you know, if you enter into that non-program phase, you may or may not have any type of community. You know, you may have your family, you may have some friends that are there, or you may not. And it's really sort of hit or miss, and it's hard because there's so much travel, there's so many different things going on to really maintain that. If you do have community, likely it is fairly fractured or spread out around the world. We talked about that previously. That's one of the joys. Like I'm in India currently. I had a friend pick me up from the airport. It was absolutely lovely. It changed my experience here. It was really, really nice to be able to do that. That's incredible. At the same time, I probably won't see him again for many years, right? And so the community that you do have is really broad and out there, and it's hard to connect with people. And then last, again, we just don't fit into normal. This is not a 9-to-5. This is not an office job. It's hard to both relate and then, connect with people that are in there because there's not a lot of shared understanding. And so that leads us to point 2, which is this understanding gap. So even if you do have a really good community, if you're surrounded by friends and family, it's likely that they have absolutely no idea what you do as a leader. This is partly because of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll being very normal, and for everybody else that being very not normal. And so, sort of a way to understand this is to think of one way I understand this is, if anyone has seen Lord of the Rings, the movies, the last movie, at the end of it, they've destroyed the ring, the hobbits go back to the Shire, and it's this really interesting scene where it's like, okay, like they've just gone through this like completely life-changing, crazy experience. They come back to the Shire, which in the movie is this sort of symbol of safety and a bubble, basically, right? And so they're coming back into this bubble. Everything has changed for them. Not much has changed for everybody else. And there's this big disconnect there. And that's basically what this understanding gap is. And in a lot of ways, this is also talking about re-entry for leaders. We talk about that with students, and we try to prep students for that. But we don't focus on leaders. And leaders go through re-entry, not just once, but many, many, many times as they're doing all these different programs. And so this is really hard. So, right, with this understanding gap, even if you do have a really good community, there can still be these feelings of loneliness and isolation because there's this lack of understanding that's there and this lack of being really able to share your world. And the last part here is relationships, which, you're just set up for a really bad outcome with relationships when you're a leader. You've got long distance, you're constantly tired and exhausted, time zones are terrible. And then if that person is not a leader, you may be contending with that understanding gap as well. Sorry, excuse me. So the outcome from all this is that leaders feel quite isolated, lonely, and then also misunderstood within all this. And so lastly here is stability, or more likely a lack of rampant instability. And so a really good way to look at this is to visualize Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so while on a program, you really exist within that program bubble. So you have for sure all of your foundational needs met, and on good programs, you probably have all of this met. And again, as we spoke about, lots of drugs on programs. So there's a lot of really great stuff, a lot of really rewarding things, renewing things, a lot of energy that exists on programs. When you go into that post-program phase, the bubble pops and a lot of these supports fall away or are very, very severely reduced. And your foundation can become very shaky. And so, you're leaving programs, you may or may not have a place to live, a place to store your stuff, financial stability. If you have loans, you have debt that you have there, Do you have vehicle or transportation options? Do you have medical insurance or other insurance? You may not have anything to really plan your life around, like a schedule or gym memberships or social events, or really any concrete plans that can help give shape to this post-program phase. As we just spoke about with community, it's likely that you don't have a great sense of belongingness and love. And even, if you do have community, there might be some understanding gaps that are there. And then, the accomplishment, the self-actualization that you feel on programs can quickly dissipate once you're getting back into that normal world. So what all this means is that the vast majority of leader energy in this post-program phase goes into meeting a lot of these really foundational needs to just be able to exist and figure out what you're going to be able to do next. And so what that means is that you don't have time or energy or resources to spend elsewhere. And so putting all three of these together, this leads into this big loop where these big three really impact each other, influence each other, and really end up eroding our foundations. We spend a lot of time just in survival mode off of programs, being able to try to figure out what comes next, try to figure out, what you're going to do, and just not have much available to be able to solve some of these issues that are going on. Another big, challenge here is that as we talk about for students with reentry, the same is true with leaders, right? You've gone through this program together as a group. When you leave that and you go back home, you're alone, you're by yourself. So a lot of people, I think, go through these challenges, and I've talked to so many leaders that are going through basically the same thing, but you don't recognize that others are also going through that. And so it's also hard to be able to ask for help in that situation, because it's something that you feel like, oh, it's just, why is this happening? Why this shouldn't be there? So one of the big outcomes of all of this is a phenomenon called the revolving door. And this is where, leaders at some point want to make a change, whether they want to get into full-time work or if they want to transition out of the field. The nature of this work is inherently challenging. So at some point, the challenges will outweigh the benefits. And so you have this variety of push and pull factors that are operating here. So for example, you have all these challenges on program. You might be exhausted, you might be a bit burnt out, you might have financial requirements, health factors, et cetera, et cetera. All these things are pushing you out of that leading position. And then there's this pull for these desires that you want to have that are a bit different: more stability, better community relationships, advancing your career, whatever it is. And so, you have this sort of energy that's pushing and pulling you out of the leading position, and you try to make that change. And that transition, that pivot point, is really, really challenging for some of the reasons we've just spoken of now in terms of these big three, and for other reasons. But when you get there, right, you're trying to do that, you go into this post-program phase, you go into all these withdrawal challenges, and those are really, really hard. They're really challenging. So you have these big three, you also have this big withdrawal, like lack of excitement. You're really missing a lot of those drugs. With lack of knowledge, it's hard to find jobs, it's hard to know your self-worth. So it can be really hard to even just get your foot in the door and to get interviews and to do all that sort of stuff. And so these end up, being push factors to push you back into leading. And then again, you have pulls, you have the drugs, you have the environment that an environment that is incredibly rewarding, and it's comforting. You can reconnect with it. And again, it's something that can be really, really fun. And so that pulls you back into the job. And so really this cycle can continue for years and years and years. I've talked to 10-year veterans that are still really stuck within this cycle. And so it can be really, really hard to get out of. And so here we have just really, again, a quick summation of everything we got here. So we have these really incredible leader joys, these drugs that we pump into leaders. They get out, they go into the post-program phase, they have engaged with these really big challenges that are there, and then the outcomes is this loop, this revolving door, this cycle of sort of like getting stuck there. So coming back to this, who cares? Why does this matter? And coming back to sort of our three essential points here. First, as leaders are the backbone of the industry, we are engaging with a bit of a damaged backbone. So we have leaders who are stuck in this, who can't quite get out, who should be doing something else, who should be doing something full-time or should be transitioned into a different field, but they can't because that is really challenging. And so they're coming back into the industry. And so we have leaders who might be semi-burnt out, potentially unable to deliver to their full capacity or to what their capacity was a year ago or 2 years ago. And so that as an industry, hampers our ability to be able to really deliver good programming, and it really sucks for that leader. Two, with incredible human beings and skill sets, this is such a waste. This is such a tragedy that these incredible beings are not able to go out and be welcomed with open arms into other organizations and into other companies, regardless of what industry that it is. And really, we have this career paralysis that can exist for these leaders, where you get stuck into this and you can't make that shift, you can't make that pivot or that transition. And it's really sad because these leaders are really, really great employees that would be an asset to any organization that's out there. And then last is just, again, we are really not adequately supporting leaders in this post-program phase. We are, in essence, engaging with them as employees, which makes sense. And I'm not denigrating program providers in any way for doing that. It's hard for program providers to really be able to do that, but we need to engage with leaders as human beings, because that's what we're asking for them to be able to show up with. That's what we're hiring them for our programs. So we should be able to support them in that way as well. Okay, so nice light topic to start us off here. So what we're gonna do is I wanna break out into smaller groups here and talk, basically. So this is sort of set the bit of a foundation, set a bit of context. We'd like people to discuss, talk about if you agree with this, if you don't, have you experienced this? Have you observed this? Has it been different for you? And then what are potential possible solutions to this? And again, thinking about this on an individual level, a company level, and then an industry-wide level. Cool, so wanted to just come back together and just share a bit of what you guys had talked about in terms of, thoughts on if you feel like this is relevant, as things that you've experienced as well, if it resonates with you. And then also what are some of the things that we can be doing to try to start addressing some of this stuff. So just group by group, whoever wants to start first, that would be great.
I can start. So in our group, we talked about the presentation, and it was so relevant and so spot on. We all mentioned that, and thank you for bringing all this. And talked a lot about the difficulties, and we talked about examples and ways it ringed tones. But also we tried to look at solutions, and we talked about transference for the leaders, so that re-entry session for them, so that they could land smoothly. We also talked about solution on program, and like how, for instance, we are just focused on work, and how we could also be building relationship with our colleagues for later, and doing something like going out, eating out together without work and stuff like that. And we also talked about how we could even do a front-loading thing when we'll, for instance, tell leaders, hey, we're going to put you on drugs for this next 3 months, so be careful about withdrawal, so those things. And the last thing I think we talked about was about how do we deal with that instability, where it's like you have this 3-month program and then nothing is coming, and you're in this waiting space and waiting anxiety. How some organizations offer some things, but also how this association could be a place where, because of the variety of the members that are here, like organizations, program providers, how they could be a place where we could ask those program providers, say, hey, tell us about upcoming programs and opportunity, so that we make them available for our simple members, so that they do know where to tap, where to go to find support, but also possibility job opportunities. And feel free to add if I missed something, people.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I might have missed it. You were saying sharing upcoming opportunities, right? And where might we share that?
So on your website, the Global Year Association, where like you could ask, for instance, Dragon Rustic Pathway and other organization, do you have upcoming jobs and opportunity during the next seasons, so that we share and with simple members? Am I making sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it'd be really nice if we had, there's so many different groups on LinkedIn and on Facebook and these different apps where you have, travel education or field leaders, something like that. Dragons has one, right? But something that's like the Gap Year Association, but for field leaders, so that you could, unless that already exists. Does that already exist?
I have no idea.
Who wants to make it? Co-creating solutions. That's a really good idea. Thanks for sharing.
Cool. So the next group.
Oh, we lost Avi. I wanted him to talk for our group. Yeah, thanks, Babakar.
Fiona or Amber, do you want to share what we talked about, or do you want me to ramble? I made a few notes, but
I didn't take notes. I'm happy to fill in, but take it away.
okay. Something we talked about, I think there was an acknowledgement of the challenge of kind of maybe sometimes the tension between the program, like the administration and the field leaders. So companies could do a better job of like making that, making that less definitive, like that less separate. Like, right, you might know one administrator who's like your program manager or whatever and have a relationship with that person, but like there's just kind of like the administrators who you're typing an email to and the field leaders, and how can you bridge the gap between those people was one idea, or an intention. Similar to the seasonal work, there was an idea that like in a forum, there would be a space to share, since it is kind of a nomadic and seasonal lifestyle, to share opportunities, a space for people to drop in opportunities for the in-betweens times. So whether that's like, it doesn't necessarily have to be, international education related or whatever, but it could be like, tulip picking, and for 3 weeks you get paid, or what, I don't know, whatever it may be.
Cool.
But something that you can do that gets paid, because like, obviously, like we talked about briefly, like how you have to have some sort of support to do this job, because because you need a place to live when you come home, and all that stuff. So so some forum for seasonal contract work that everybody could add into. And I think that could be like from leaders, from program providers, from whoever. We talked about burnout and self-care, a space to put resources in for self-care. Maybe even like a mental health, like students have access to mental health resources. Oftentimes leaders don't. Like if you want to like talk to a therapist for like an hour in the field, like I'm sure that could be arranged, but it's not normalized. So something like some sort of self-care resources. Help companies helping program leaders process a bit more, debrief their program, and putting them in contact with other leaders potentially to create that, just like giving them patience and support during that time of processing after the program. All right, what did I miss?
No, I think you covered most of it that we had, but yeah, I guess having empathy and understanding for the transient nature of the job, you know, talking about that revolving door, you know, having to try and piece together, like it's fatigue, trying to constantly piece together different contracts and like what you're doing with that in between time. So providing a community of support to help those in between times to lessen that load. Yeah.
Yeah, we do a really good job of a staff training before an experience, but maybe somebody would be really passionate about creating an exit interview, you know, like an exit training, an exit staff training. Often sometimes if you're on program, you go for beers and then you're like, okay, now we're done. And everybody just normalizes that that's how you close the experience, but it could be so much deeper. Yeah, it's a really good one.
I'm keen to hear from everyone about like the timing of their debriefs. We sort of weigh up with this, like in terms of our debriefs with our instructors, between like a couple of weeks later. So you have that processing time to maybe like reflect and draw new conclusions and then having a good like solid debrief. Or that's often buying into the time of the like outside of the contract, you know, like in the instructor's personal time. Some of them are onto new jobs, new things. Or do you do it like in the couple of days afterwards, which is built into the contract because that's the time that they're still on and it's still fresh in their memory. Like I'm quite keen to hear everybody's perspectives on that. Anyone?
I have an opinion. I would say right after a program is best. But that's my opinion. What about you guys?
I think the most successful debriefs I've had take place like right as I returned home, but before I would move into another role. So it might be technically outside of my contract, but usually I'm very keen to give feedback. So I don't really mind having that 1 hour conversation.
In terms of the audience too, as someone who's looking to break into this industry, it might be awesome for the audience to be kind of broader and that you're sharing your experience, obviously, maybe so that it gets back to the gap year program, but also maybe just a general population. So folks that are interested in the industry could also hear like a little bit about it as well.
Christine, we toyed around with an idea of, we have another member of the Field Leader Committee who's not here right now, but I think he's really keen on like podcasting and stuff. So there was an idea that like, you know, if some former current leaders wanted to be interviewed about their experience, there would be like a space where we maybe, you know, again, this forum, we would be able to like put up podcasts of people talking about their experiences in the field as a way to learn a little bit more about what this work actually looks like. I don't know if that speaks to what you're talking about.
Definitely. I think podcasts are awesome.
Mm-hmm. Especially with such a niche kind of lifestyle and job. I can just imagine field leaders listening to that on a bus in between program or on program. You know, some people listen to a relationship podcast and they're like, that's exactly what I'm going through. And then field leaders could be like, exactly, that's my issue with my co-leader, you know. It's an awesome idea.
I would just say, to answer your question, Fee, my personal take is sooner rather than later. Just things are relevant, student experiences to like talk about are fresh. And even on a plane ride across the Atlantic, like blurs the crispness of those memories. And also like, yeah, I would agree with like jutting into the uncontracted time doesn't sit well with everyone. So if we're going for like universal policy, I feel like that's my take.
Awesome, thanks y'all. I think we have one more group.
Yeah, I can share. Avi is out of the Zoom, I think. And I'll just kind of like introduce Avi, but he's a kayak guide right now. So he's like on programs and balancing like paying for rent and living in a place and also leading trips seasonally. So yeah, we had some really good conversations about that. And one super interesting part of this ecosystem that he brought up that I really liked is not hearing back from the operator about your next contract afterwards, and really having no understanding of what role you are supposed to play in that as a leader. I remember my first years running trips in Southeast Asia, and I had no idea, am I supposed to be bugging them all the time? Like, hey, I'm available, I'm available. They would reach out to me, conversely, very spontaneously and often last minute, which was honestly truly infuriating, even though I was like living a spontaneous life. And it often gets masked as that's just how the industry is. So we were talking about how that excuse often gets thrown around a lot and how frustrating that can be. And I wonder if the pandemic will change that, because I don't know how spontaneous we can be right now. So at staff training, teaching your field leaders how to stay in contact and what kind of relationship they should or should not be maintaining with you after trips. Because also on the emotional side of this, there's a lot of anxiety around the, am I on the list? So you lead a summer or you start to lead a few trips and then you don't get called back and your friends are getting called back. And I have friends who still have like self-worth issues about that, about like, I never got calls back and I still feel really awkward about it. And it's often not personal, and it's just the extroverts got the jobs and the introverts didn't, or something like that. That's a bit out of your control. So having leaders and having managers address that would be really beautiful, I think. Yeah, I think that's the extent. Does anybody have any thoughts about that or has experienced that?
Well, the thing that comes to mind for me on that is just to kind of dovetail on that there absolutely are introverted leadership styles, and that can even be a leadership strength, especially relating to the quieter students, or telling the group, hey, pause and let's write a reflection for 5 minutes, while the extroverts can sit down and kind of write their thoughts and the introverted students can take the time to process. Introverted leaders definitely could have that skill. And I think there could be a lot more training around like really just noticing different leadership styles and the strengths therein. So strengths-based leadership for leaders. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I
introverts.
Tailing on from that as well, I guess being on the other side of like doing the allocations for instructors going to programs, it's such a battle of like weighing everything up. Like you know, often these students leave it quite late to book onto a program, so you don't know where your numbers are actually going to sit if a program can run or not at all. So if you have work or not, like literally 2 months, you know, out, because sometimes it can completely change. So I'm sitting in that space at the moment. Like I want to give that certainty to our instructors. I really want to say to them, yeah, 100%. And I can do that to some because those programs I know will go. Others, it's a horrible position to say to them, but like, you know, we've got you for this, but like it might go, it might not. And it's definitely something like I'd love to find ways that we can overcome that or create different ways of looking at it, so we can give that more certainty and further out, you know.
One thing we also talked about that I don't think has been mentioned, and this is more of like a company industry-wide potential solution, is to like create a way that it is like a year contract or something, and you work for the company for a year and you have health insurance, and maybe you are in, you know, in the States or wherever you're based, like where you're in one place for 6 months and then you're leading for, you know, 3 months. And I don't know, just some combination of like stability and community that it could like feed that need. And you're still employed during that time, you know, and also in the field. So obviously that's like a little bit of a pipe dream, because we know that that's like, because you don't know your numbers until the last minute, and there's a lot of things going into it that you don't know how many people you can employ and whether you can sustain them like that. But just something to shoot for maybe in the industry is like something where we can offer people more stability and community, so then these opportunities can be more available to a lot more people too. So just to add to that.
I'm just chiming in my 2 cents here very quickly. In full disclosure, so I worked for Pacific Discovery this past mini-mester. It was my first time as an instructor. Fiona's my supervisor. Neither of us knew we were going to be on this call, so it's just been so far so good. And we were in a breakout room together. Woohoo! I mean, this is like a very like individual note, but like tip my head off to Fee as far as like something Pacific Discovery has done really well, and that I don't know how other organizations handle this, but like for the most part, I've felt like there's been transparency in the numbers and like where the students are at, and like, oh, we need 2 more spots to make, you know, the Costa Rica program go, or something like that. Like even little like might not feel like that significant bits of information, but on the receiving end as an instructor, that's just like, oh, okay, I know something. Like I have something to grasp onto rather than just like grasping for straws. So again, really personal individual note. I don't know how that can be applied across the industry or across orgs, but that's been my take as a first-time instructor.
Just building on that, I think transparency is like, so, I mean, I remember, you know, working for an organization that like was like, oh, if you have the language skill, you get paid this much, or if you have this many years experience, or you're a returning instructor. And I don't know that all organizations have that. So I think that could also be a standard to strive for, is like that transparency of like, if you have these certain skills, or you have worked for us for a certain amount of time or whatever, there is an advantage to that, or a professional development will help, like will contribute towards you learning this language better, or whatever it may be. But like that just clicked with me in terms of transparency, that I think is really important with organizations and maybe industry-wide as well.
Awesome, thanks y'all. I have a quick question. So I think a lot of stuff we've been talking about is, you know, stuff that we can try to address on a company level, on a bit of an industry level. I'm really curious what your thoughts are on what we can do individually to be able to try to address some of these things, to be able to try to support people. So I just want to pose that as a question and see if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Mentorship. If you're transitioning out as a leader, or you're still a leader, finding somebody who's new and having a little, what do they call it? Pen pal through the process.
I think also, I don't know, I want to call it allyship. It's like, and I have seen that unfold within Dragon. It's like when someone will just go and talk to someone because they figure out they're potentially the person who doesn't get the information that I know well, and then, hey, let's sit and talk about that. I remember one great guy who did that, and it was so powerful. It's even because there's also this whole group of people who are not from the state, who are not aware of things that are happening, who even maybe their level of English or information is not good enough so that they can access to things. Even yeah, there's some great guy out there who just sit with someone and say, hey, do you know about that? What? Yeah, because sometimes people go through a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I think I'm going to try to wrap this up because we do have one more session for today. This has been really great. Really great to hear all these thoughts. I think, a couple of things that have jumped out at me is one of the things is just really like this question of what is our responsibility as an industry? Like where does that lie? What is our responsibility to these staff members? And I feel like we've been operating on a certain paradigm that I think has led to all these different things that are happening. And so I feel like we need to pose that question again. And it's also, it's a very different time than 10 years ago, than 20 years ago when all this stuff started up. And I feel like a lot of the systems that we have are still sort of from that original seed that have been just built up and grown out of that. And maybe they don't serve us as well as they used to, or just like the things that we need to address may be a bit different now. So that was one of the things. And then one of the other things I think is just, it's hard for us to have the language to be able to actually talk about this stuff and to be able to really put that into more like a normal context. I think that sort of understanding gap, that lack of being able to integrate is really big and really strong and causes a lot of these different issues as well. And so I think being able to develop some more of that language that can speak to it can be really powerful as well. But cool. So
but the kind of the idea of this session was, as Kai mentioned in his presentation, as field leaders, we have this like incredible set of skills that we're not always sure how to distill into a narrative. So we thought that this session would be a good way for us all to reflect on our experiences in the field. And I know that in this Zoom room right now, we kind of have a plethora of experiences and people coming from all over the place. So we'll sort of adapt what we're asking of you as we go on. And if something doesn't make sense, like open space, of course. But Kempie and I are going to kick things off by just talking about our mini narratives and then going from there into what we mean when we say crafting your narrative and what that means kind of in the field leader perspective. So I'll start. My name is Beth. I very accidentally fell into the world of experiential education right when I got back from the Peace Corps about 8 years ago. And I ended up, again, accidentally spending a summer in New Orleans with Rustic Pathways and then moving into Southeast Asia and then moving more into the curriculum design and development and higher education side of gap year because I loved it so much and found this niche working with students that was a love I didn't even know I had. And since then, I have kind of been in the cycle of trying to remove myself from the world while still remaining involved in the world because it's been such a passion of mine. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I did go back in between leading programs to get my master's in global health and international development policy and was able to actually teach that at a college level with one of the organizations I work through, which has allowed me to tap more into the higher education space side of things.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. So I'm Kempie. I was a gap year leader and high school leader for high school programs and college programs for about a decade. I got thrown into the fire when I was like 24. I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured it out. And then I really loved it. And so, so I just kept going back for more. Absolutely loved working with different populations, different places. But then eventually like was kind of tiring out a little bit, and getting a little like, nauseous from all the movement, shall we say. And so I went back to school, and got a master's in international education and development, where I did focus on how international experiential leaders facilitated transformation in their students, facilitated transformative learning. And then I got really interested in this idea of how there are often, like, especially in study abroad, so many missed opportunities, so many moments that aren't facilitated in a way that like could lead to like a deeper understanding and a deeper transformation, so they just didn't like come back from their program and they were like, it was fun. They have siesta or something like that, something very superficial, that they like would learn something more about themselves, more about the culture, that type of thing. So I started consulting, and that's kind of where I noticed that even more, for a school that was building out a study abroad program, a global program. And and then started my own consulting company to help other organizations really think about these transformative moments and how to shape a program and train leaders or train teachers or whoever it may be to actually facilitate this deeper learning so that they can make the most of so the students get the most out of the experience. So that's a little bit of my story.
So we designed this session to be more interactive and to have you focus more on crafting your narrative in a way that shares your skills, talents, and expertise, because of kind of the nature of how niche and unique our jobs and our roles are that we hold within these organizations, and how misunderstood we often feel. So we thought that by turning this into something where you're able to make your experiences more digestible, you can kind of explain your job and lifestyle and how sometimes it's not easy to tell one from the other. So with that, we thought we would share maybe a quite familiar sentiment or meme style with all of you. We were thinking of like what my mom thinks I do, what my friends think I do type situation. And this resonated really deeply with me. I know once my uncle pulled me aside at Christmas and he said, so like, who's paying for you to just travel all over the world? Like, are you still on your dad's credit card? Like, what's going on? And I had to explain to him that like, this was indeed my job, but I'm sure all of us have had those moments. So we're curious now to crowdsource a little from you all. You can feel free to unmute yourself. What do you tell people you do? Just in like one or two words, how do you describe it?
I say alternative study abroad.
Okay, I like that actually. I've never heard that.
I never use the term study abroad, but everyone responds, oh, study abroad.
It's a lot easier of an entry into the conversation.
Yeah.
You can lead into the well, actually, instead of starting with the well, actually, actually.
Yeah, totally.
I used to start with, sorry, go Stamrat.
Go ahead, Kyle.
I used to start with student travel, as in student travel, but that never really landed very well. And then there were follow-up questions, and then it just got complicated from there.
Yeah.
Well, I normally go like I paid to get travel. I mean, I travel and I get paid for it. I just say it simple, and most people are like, in my community and the IT and sciences background, they're like, what? You actually get paid to travel? I'm like, yeah, that's it. stop it there.
Yeah, keep it vague.
I often share, like I tell, I work with teenagers and I help them become better humans through travel. Or like I often work with like really gross, annoying teenagers and help them recognize what's important in the world. Like something a little bit humorous with like, actually, we make a difference with what we do. It's not just getting paid to play. So always being a little bit sarcastic mixed with like a happy ending.
I usually just say educator. Like when I have to write down my occupation, that's usually what I go to. And depending on who I'm talking about, I'll be like, oh, an experiential educator, if they can grasp the language. But I've gotten counselor for sure, like camp counselor, all of those.
I've kind of reclaimed the term tourism lately as well. At least in Vietnam, it's much easier to understand because a lot of people here are in tourism. So that used to be a nasty word to me, and I felt it didn't describe the industry. But I think tourism is getting more responsible and cool. So I think that word has less weight now, or like is maybe more positive, which has been interesting.
Is sustainable a big buzzword for you guys? Does that come up?
Yeah, sometimes I'll say responsible travel,
Mm-hmm.
but then they're like, what?
Yeah, I'm not just going to a country to party. Like I'm going to a country to live life and grow and learn. Yeah.
One of the things I've always found so interesting about it is even though it like lies, this role of a leader lies outside the norm, everything that we do lies within the norm. It's just the intersection and the interplay and of it that actually makes it like so hard for others to digest it. In my opinion, I don't know if other people have had that experience. It's like, it's not unusual to be a guide or to be an educator or to, you know, manage some logistics. Other jobs that are normal jobs, 9-to-5 jobs do that, but it's because of the way in which we do it that I think becomes quite challenging to understand for if you're outside of it.
Yeah, and I think that might be actually like a lead in to our next kind of idea and concept is the hats and the jobs and the interplay of roles that we have as leaders. So curious, I think we can put these in the slides, in the chat. Anything you can think of off the top of your head, a hat that you have worn as a leader.
Therapist, nurse, fun uncle. Yes, you have with the doctor.
Sorry, I keep sending people private messages instead of the group.
Yeah, I did that too, sorry.
Oh, God.
Oh, wow, that's specific. I like that. So yeah, sorry, I guess we can like say them all out loud in case people are watching the recording. So we've got nanny, therapist, nurse, fun uncle, awkward aunt, doctor, tourist guide, shoulder to cry on, travel manager, airport navigator, that's an important one, hotel concierge, driver, logistics magician, first aid provider, physical and mental translator, good cop, bad cop, food tourism guide for Dublin's best ramen, teacher, father, jester, entertainer, coach. Anything else?
Yeah, I think like if we had 10 more folks in this call, we'd have 30 more hats and roles and interplay of things that we do. I think another interesting thing is kind of the way Kempie and I described it when we were brainstorming this session is the roles we carry and the hats we wear, and how that becomes so innately part of your identity as a field leader, because leader just is an all-encompassing term for kind of what that means. And I think in certain programs, you can think of every program as being unique in terms of the leaders and the students and the group dynamics. But I also think that every leader has their own unique set of skills and is their own unique leader on the, like as an individual and within their identity as well, which is kind of a cool thing to think about, that not all leaders are made the same. Sorry, something, oh, here we go. Kempie, we did something with this slide.
Oh, nice. I will promoter, coach promoter, life explainer, catching rooftop bandicoots. I don't even know what that means. Entertainer and annoying parent whisperer. Sorry, I just wanted to add for anybody who's watching.
Oh no, perfect. So we're gonna pull back up. This is one of Kai's incredible diagrams slash brain children, but this just, I feel like, more comprehensively goes into the hats we wear and the actual skills that come out of each of those individual identities in those hats. So one thing to think about as well is we wear these hats without actually having the identities of those things, or maybe necessarily having any training or a lot of experience before we move into these roles. So you're like essentially a parent without ever having been a parent. Maybe you have been, but most of the time you are not. You're a nurse without having maybe much medical training besides WFR or WFR, first aid. You're a teacher, but maybe you've never taught in a traditional K-12 institution or higher ed. So you're often just leaning on the 5 or 3 day training that you have before a program and really stepping into these roles. And within that, you're bringing different aspects of these roles into the leadership that you're taking on, which is something that's kind of hard to understand as deeply as it should be. And we don't really understand what this means as we're explaining it, unless you are someone who's in the field who really gets it. And it is exactly what we all kind of have generated within this Zoom room and within our community. So Kempie, I know you broke this up into beautiful little subcategories when we were talking.
Oh, you mean in terms of like risk management and logistics, these types of things?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just kind of, I mean, I guess I touched on it a little bit before, but just how the leader role is the interplay of all these things and the dynamic nature, right? Like one student you might be being an educator to, at the same time you're being like a risk manager for the other student. So like you're doing multifaceted things and dynamic things all at the same time. And I think that this kind of graph, like just seeing our skills, and this is obviously not exhaustive, but that's a way to help make our roles a little more digestible and help share our narratives with other people, whether it's your parents, whether it's your partner, whether it's your, a potential employer. The way to communicate that can often be through kind of breaking down what we do and sharing our stories that way. I don't know if you want to add anything, Beth, to that.
No, perfect. And just as a plug from the voice of Kai, I feel like as leaders, we have better and more refined skills than probably 80% of the US office workforce. I don't know any of my friends in corporate America that have squeezed bugs out of students or also managed hotel logistics and transport at the same time. But in addition to this, the position just requires you to be a good human and to bring your entire self and your entire being both to your students and your co-leads and the communities in which you are, while also maybe being really uncomfortable or out of your comfort zone physically, mentally, emotionally at the exact same time, which is part of the reason that leading is so amazing and so addicting and something that's important to share. So we wanted to talk a little bit about like the soul connection to the roles that we carry.
Yeah, so this is just a little inspirational quote: respond to every call which excites your spirit. And I think it's often, you know, we talk about it being a job, but also it's like a lifestyle. It is who you are, and it requires you to be your best self. Like oftentimes you hear that in kind of leader spaces, and you're being a role model for others. And we just wanted to like kind of honor that it is like a very emotional, maybe even spiritual role that you take on. And actually you might even make compromises to your own identities in doing it, right? Like you might be a different person out like back at home, wherever that is. And you have to be, because you have to be this role model, you kind of have to compromise your vulnerabilities or whatever. So we just wanted to like take a moment to, when we are talking about kind of sharing what we do with other people, it's also really important to like acknowledge that this is like who we are and these are our identities, and to honor that a bit. And then we just wanted to talk about like sharing our stories, starting off in a tangible way of sharing our stories, of thinking about all the identities and all the maybe roles or hats that you wear. Which ones excite you the most? Which ones connect to your values?
Yeah. And I think so often this comes up, you know, in the sessions of getting to know your co-leads, where you're like, hey, I love holding the med bag, but don't make me ever call a parent. Or I'm not your logistics person, but I can do student mental health all day. And I think a lot of those moments are the ones that really, at least for me, resonate with thinking about what I've wanted to do outside of the field and which identities have like really sung to my heart and soul and spirit and made me think about what this means outside of the role. So yeah, Evan, that's a great question. Which skills that you use connect to your values? So one exercise we wanted to do that we hope sort of brings some of this to light is to think and write down just for about 5 to 7 minutes a story of one of your most meaningful experiences as a leader. And I know that we have a few folks in the Zoom room right now, or maybe watching this recording, who have not yet been a leader or have been on a different side of field leaders, and that's okay. Maybe it's one of your moments in a related experience, or one of your moments when you were a student in that experience. But we would love for this story to reflect 1 to 2 of those leader identities that you feel resonate and speak to your soul. And also just keep in mind that your story is obviously much more robust than this. We're just using this as an exercise to kind of get those juices flowing and reminding you how amazing you are. So take a deep breath, take out that pen and paper or keyboard or however you would like to write this down, and we'll give you a few minutes to reflect on that.
So we were wondering if we have any brave souls that would like to share their stories with us. Not all at once.
I'm happy to go.
Great.
Are you looking for like a time amount? I want to honor our time. I don't want it like 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So my story is somewhat recent. When I was leading a program in Thailand, we were staying on an island called Koh Mook in the South Islands of Thailand. And we had just had like kind of some group dynamic things that we were navigating and had navigated and wanted to put them behind us. And it just so happened to be a full moon that night. And we had staying at a place not too far from like basically our own private beach. So I asked the students to, if they would be interested, and kind of like nudge them along, like this would be really cool. Like I'm on board with it. So the passion was like seeping down to them ideally. To have a full moon dance party and like a releasing ceremony, so to speak. They ended up going for it, and I kind of like set the tone by like talking about the significance of the full moon to different times and traditions and cultures. Just like large brush stroke over that and what the full moon signifies in general, like a time of celebration, a time of releasing what's no longer serving us. So we just went around and like optional, people could share if they want what they were celebrating via movement. And they totally went for it. And we had mostly females on this group. So it was like, that was really special too. Because the one male that we had wasn't feeling good, so wasn't there. So it was only females, which I thought was really special. And just like seeing them and like observing alongside of them, like dancing in the waves, the tide was crazy, like coming towards the moon, and just like dancing, releasing, celebrating, frolicking, having a great time. And then hearing them at the end of program talk about that as one of their highlights. Just felt really meaningful. And I think the reason it felt meaningful is because it connected with my values. So I'm like a firm believer that we are spiritual beings. And I love, Kai, that you've kind of framed this, and like, this is really spiritual work, in my opinion. And like the students got to experience that. It gave me kind of a platform to talk about that and just like nudge that in there, kind of weave that through at our itinerary. And another value of mine is play. So it's just super playful. What else? And just connection, like connecting to themselves, connecting to others within our group, connecting to nature, and then perhaps that which is beyond. And then, yeah, I guess the role that I saw myself playing in that was mentor, maybe, educator. Yeah. I hope that's what y'all were looking for, but that's my story.
That's fantastic. And I think like that story illustrated experiential education so well without like saying experiential education, right? Like I understood what you were doing without using these terms that might be barriers to people like who are new to the field.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. That was beautiful.
Any other brave souls? I saw Chris and Evan writing a lot.
Yeah, Evan, forgive me, like chime in if I say anything wrong, but like I reflect on this this time that Evan and I had as co-leaders for a 3-week program. She's lovely. I will work with her every day. All that kind of stuff. Is low-key thought we were running potentially the worst program. Like I was like, do these kids like this? Are they okay? We had students getting sick every single day. There was issues every single day. It was one of the hardest programs I've run. And then so no joke, like one kid was gonna go home because he was so tall, he forgot how ceilings work, and he walked into doors. He was like 6'5" in Southeast Asia, and it just didn't work out for him. So poor guy got like 3 concussions in like a week trip. And he was also like the black sheep of the group, and there was emotional impacts, all the things. So me and Evan were like, do we suck as program leaders, or is this on us, or is this like the group? Is it like, it was one of those kind of groups. Fast forward 3 weeks, I've never cried my eyes out more than I ever did after a Rustic Ties than this group. They all like, it went from, we thought we were like, all right, let's just like get through this and like and finish this program and like move on, to Evan, I don't know if you remember this, like we had to take like 15 breaks. Like we had like a 3, 4, 5 hour long Rustic Tie experience. And for those of you that don't know what Rustic Ties is, it's just like a closing ceremony, kind of discussing like how you felt about the program and the impact it had on you, like your favorite moments. Everyone gets a bracelet towards the end, and like So you pass around. So we had a group of like 10, 15 students. And so we're passing around a rustic tie, so a wristlet, whatever, a bracelet, and everyone's saying a meaningful thing to that person, and then it ends on them to tie it on the wrist. I cried. We talked about this. There were certain students that were like huge pain in the ass the whole program. Then we're like, actually, I love you now because now I understand you. Or we had this really great conversation and all of that. So it just blew my mind that Evan and I can go from like a very we at that point we were 2-year alums at Rustic Pathways, and I kind of felt like I was like, okay, I'm a veteran now, and I've like lived this adventurous life, and I could bring a lot to the program being a year 2 program leader. I thought I was cooler than I really am, but like I brought into that program like, oh, this isn't as great as I thought it would be, yet it gravely impacted the lives of the students there, to the point, and Evan, I don't know if this is a curveball, I'll respect their name, but they go by the name Billy now. They reached out to me about a college essay they wrote about our trip. They've transitioned into male pronouns now, and that was all stemmed from conversations on our program in Southeast Asia. And that kind of stuff just gets lost on me sometimes. Of what's something super small to me, because I've run a million programs now, is life changing to these students. And so that's the stuff that just like draws me in every single time. Evan, sorry if I spoke over you, but like, if there's anything you want to share. Cool.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so like how would that connect to your values, you think? Like, I mean, if I know you, Chris, a little bit, like I think having an impact is really important to you. I don't know if that's a value per se, but like changing people's lives and perspectives, or what would be like a value system as part of that?
Yeah, and I'm hoping I wonder if this can turn into a conversation, but like the pressure that gets put on and the impact of a program leader and kind of the sense of responsibility. I'm not just here to shepherd you from A to B and keep you alive on a program. If I'm doing my job right, I'm impacting your life, right? And in a very positive way. I don't want to make you think and act and be like me, but I want to be an influence on you. I studied abroad in Australia in 2009, and that set me on a trajectory to go into experiential learning. Now I'm a life coach, and I work with gap year students and all that. And I remembered that exact aha moment that I had with this guy named Troy in the outback of Australia that had the most meaningful conversation I've ever had. I want to do that to as many people as I can. So that's like, I don't know if that's a value or kind of like a perspective or like a pressure, what have you.
Yeah, how do we explain that? Like, because some people will just put their head down and do the task, but being interested in making something meaningful is a really beautiful value and skill that not everybody would bring everywhere they go. I'm trying to write that right now, and I'm having like a hard time explaining what that part of me is like. And I wrote, I like to make serious moments more funny and fun stuff more serious. Like, I don't really know what that means, but like helping students understand the value of an experience and like having us like more deeply understand the culture and like creating relationships and things like that. But I'm having trouble putting it into words.
I think it's like a matter of not taking things for granted, right? So really quick short story is that my entire family has moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and now we're all around each other a lot more for the first time in our adult lives. My sister's never experienced my parents being around this much, and we've never experienced all 4 of us being together this much. And a big conversation that keeps coming up is just gratitude of the dinner table and having that small conversation that doesn't feel like a big thing, but should be a bigger deal. I bring that to orientation with students, or after that, like kind of week of getting to know each other, like you're in your second, third week with a student or group, what have you, you're kind of ripping the Band-Aid and having those deeper conversations, and it evolves into I hate to call it the family that kind of travels together, but it does kind of turn into like the Partridge Family, and you're just like in this merry band of people getting your way through Southeast Asia or wherever you are, right? But it just turns into, you can't help but build a bond. And how do the facilitators help facilitate that, right? In a negative or positive way. And it's all role modeling, and kind of like, that's how we get into the parenting hat or the fun uncle hat or the doctor hat, or like when students would have like GYA, I'll try not to be too graphic, but like everyone got sick in Southeast Asia, right? So like me holding a girl over a boat while she's being sick and like locking eyes with her, being like, I got you. She wrote that in her college essay. Like that blows my mind, right? So that's the kind of power that we have as facilitators. I love that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox. I could talk to you all that.
No, I think it's a good point, Chris. And I do think it's the stories of holding back students' hair when they're getting sick off a boat on the Mekong or whatever it is that actually, even though they're quite mundane as program leaders or facilitators because they happen so often, it's kind of the roles that you take and the values you hold in them, which is kind of what I guess we've asked for you to think about a little bit more in this exercise. And I think with that, even though I'm sure all of us could share, hopefully we'll have some space and bandwidth if anyone feels compelled to share tomorrow as well. But I want to respect the rest of everyone's evenings or mornings, wherever you are in the world. So, sorry, I'm putting my screen back up.
I think yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Kempie.
Oh no, I just think so just like when listening to stories of you know, that some of the stories that were just shared, just thinking about like as you refine your narrative and it could be to like, you know, again, like a familiar audience, like an employer, but like what makes a quote unquote good narrative, and like how can we, and I think I remember like when I first started leading, I would like come back and just like dump all these details, and it was like way too much information for anyone to process, right? Like it was like I was like rehashing the whole semester to a friend, and I was like looking back, I'm like horrified. I'm like, they obviously could not take that in. But just thinking about like knowing your audience, meeting them where they're at, like what they're, you know, whether it's an employer or a friend or whatever, like what are they interested in knowing about you, and how can you speak to the multiple identities and hats you wear and like tie in your values in that, and give a really good sense of you, what you do and who you are in like, you know, 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah, so the sweet spot of details, kind of just thinking about that, again, audience, and how it connects to your values. And that is like, I think a great way to like kind of share what you do with other, no matter who it is. Beth, did you want to add anything else to that?
Well, I think when Kempie and I were thinking about this session more broadly, we were really cognizant that this story and where everybody in this space is right now might look a little bit different. So for some folks, this might look like a LinkedIn summary or a resume summary. And for some of us, it might look like a grad school essay or a job interview question. So I think within these narratives, there's so many opportunities to just make your story more powerful and really showcase who you are as a person within these roles. I know, at least for me, I often feel like my best version of myself when I'm leading programs because I have this space to showcase all of these skills I've refined, and it feels really special when I have another space to share that. So to have an opportunity to share that like cohesively and well feels like a privilege. So yeah, I'm still refining my narrative all the time, still haven't quite figured it out. So I'm grateful for a group to be able to continue to do that with. And I think just to close this out, we have like a mini homework assignment, but I don't really want to use the word homework. So reflective exercise maybe, that we'll use a little bit more tomorrow, but we're just asking for you to think a little bit more about either this story that you wrote down today or something that came up as we were talking and thinking, and just hone it in a little bit if you have the bandwidth to do so, and think about how you might want to use it moving forward, either within this world and this industry or outside of it. And just take a minute on a walk or as you're going to bed tonight to think about how amazing you are and all of the skills that you've contributed to this work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all. And again, I think it's such a valuable exercise to just like continually think about, what you do and how it is a part of, it is your being, and to think about how what that says about your values. I think that is like a really important practice that I think I didn't do enough when I was actually in the field. And I feel like I did a lot more after I left the field, but I think that it's an important practice to also revisit, because our values sometimes change too. But yeah, but thank you guys for being here for this evening and a morning somewhere. Yeah. Day.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. Thanks, everybody. Samrat, do you want to drop the survey into the chat? So we do have just a really quick survey for you guys. That'd be really great to fill out. Just give us a little bit of quick feedback. Awesome. Thanks, Samrat. So that's just in the chat there. So if you could do that.
The feedback, please, just take the time out, fill it out. It's be as honest as possible. It'd be really helpful to us.
I think as Kai mentioned in the beginning, this is a work in progress. And we want to create this larger leader community to connect, support, and learn from. But like we want to grow it, and we want it to come from us and from a larger us. So yeah, invite your friends to come tomorrow. And what's the preview for tomorrow? What are we talking about tomorrow?
Yeah, so tomorrow we're talking about both how to develop your career within the industry, what that looks like. We'll talk about the industry a little bit more, what opportunities exist there, how to go about doing that, and then also transitioning on to something else. So basically, like growing your career in whatever way that looks like, whether within the industry or in some other analogous field. And then also sort of connecting as a community at the end there. So it should be fun.